I called them the mechanic like it was a slur, and 48 hours later she was the one being escorted out of a courthouse in handcuffs. My name is Walter Boone. I'm 67 years old, and this is what happened at my son's rehearsal dinner. I was standing by the coat check when I heard her say it. Oh, don't worry about him. He's just the mechanic Daniel hired for the weekend. She wasn't whispering. She wanted the people around her to hear it, wanted them to laugh along, and they did. That soft, polite laugh rich people give when they think they're being discreet about their cruelty. I looked down at my hands. 40 years of grease had worked its way so deep into the creases of my knuckles that no amount of scrubbing ever got it all the way out. I'd worn my good Navy suit, the one I bought for my wife's funeral 3 years back, and I'd had it pressed that morning at the cleaners on Route 9 near my shop. I thought I looked respectable. Standing in that ballroom at the Ashcroft Country Club outside Wilmington, Delaware, under lights that cost more than my truck, I understood in one clean, humiliating second that respectable wasn't the same thing as belonging. The woman who said it was Deborah Whitfield, mother of the bride. Her daughter, Chelsea, was marrying my son Marcus in 2 days. I'd been trying for 8 months to give this family the benefit of the doubt, and standing there with my ears burning, I finally ran out of benefit to give. I turned toward the exit. I wasn't going to make a scene. I was just going to leave, quietly, the way my father taught me to leave rooms where I wasn't wanted, without giving anyone the satisfaction of watching you break. But before I got 3 steps, Marcus was beside me. He put his hand on my shoulder, firm, and leaned in close enough that only I could hear him. Dad, don't go. Give me 48 hours. I need you here, and I need you to trust me. That was it. No explanation. Just his eyes, steady in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy standing over an engine with me, trying to figure out why it wouldn't turn over. I had no idea, standing in that ballroom with my chest still tight with shame, what my son already knew. Neither did the Whitfields. Neither did Chelsea. My name is Walter Boone. Everybody who's known me more than 5 minutes calls me Walt. I've spent my whole life in Newark, Delaware, a town most people driving up I-95 never bother to exit for. I own Boone's Automotive off Elkton Road, a shop my father started in 1968 with a single lift and a coffee can full of loose change for making change. I took it over when I was 26. I've spent 41 years underneath cars other people gave up on, and I built something out of it. Not a fortune, not the kind of money that gets you invited to country clubs, but something solid. 3 bays, 6 employees, a reputation that means when something's wrong with your transmission in Newcastle County, somebody eventually tells you to go see Walt Boone. My wife Carol was the reason any of it worked. She kept the books, kept me honest, kept our son fed and our marriage laughing even during the years when the shop barely broke even. She had a way of looking at a person for exactly 4 seconds and telling you everything you needed to know about their character. She used to say, Walt, watch how a person treats the guy who parks their car. That's who they really are. Carol died of ovarian cancer 3 years ago, 11 months from diagnosis to the funeral, and there hasn't been a single day since where I haven't reached for her side of the bed out of habit before I remember. Marcus is 29. He went to the University of Delaware on a partial scholarship and worked at my shop every summer to cover the rest, and I want you to understand that. My son has grease under his fingernails just like I do, even now that he's an aerospace engineer working contracts for a defense contractor outside Philadelphia. He didn't come from money, and he never pretended to. That's part of what made this whole thing so hard to watch unfold. About 1.5 years ago, he brought a woman home for Sunday dinner, Chelsea Whitfield. Her family had money that had been in the family 3 generations, real estate mostly, office parks and strip malls, scattered across 3 states, the kind of wealth that's less about a big house and more about never once in your life having to check a price tag. Her father, Gordon Whitfield, ran the family holding company. Her mother, Deborah, didn't work, hadn't in 20 years, spent her time on museum boards and a garden club that apparently required a great deal of white wine to properly administer. Chelsea was polite to me at that first dinner, complimented my pot roast, asked about the shop, smiled the whole time. But Carol wasn't there to read her for me anymore, and I didn't trust my own instincts the way I used to. Still, something in the way Chelsea's eyes moved around my kitchen, cataloging things, lingering a half-second too long on the chipped tile by the sink, the same eyes that later would flick down at my hands whenever I reached for anything, told me she was taking inventory. I chalked it up to nerves. I chalked it up to me being an overprotective father who'd lost his wife and was holding on too tight to his only son. I told myself that for 18 months. I met the rest of the Whitfields at their house in Greenville. One of those neighborhoods where the lawns look painted on. Gordon shook my hand the way you shake hands with a delivery driver. Quick, transactional, already looking past me toward someone more useful. Deborah asked me about my work with a smile that never once reached her eyes, called it such honest labor, said the word honest like it was a nice consolation prize for a life that hadn't amounted to much. I told myself Marcus was happy, and that was what mattered, and I kept my mouth shut and kept showing up. Then came the rehearsal dinner, 2 nights before the wedding. I got there 15 minutes late because a customer's brakes were shot, and I couldn't in good conscience send him home unsafe, and by the time I walked in, cleaned up as best I could, tie straight, shoes I'd shined that morning, most of the room was already seated. That's when I heard Deborah say it, the mechanic comment, loud enough, on purpose. I want to be honest with you the way I'd want someone honest with me. I had one hand already reaching for that door handle. 67 years old, and shame doesn't care about your age. It doesn't care that you've raised a good son, and buried a good wife, and built something real with your own 2 hands. It just reaches in and finds the 12-year-old boy who never quite believed he belonged anywhere fancy, and it yanks him right back up to the surface. Then Marcus, 4 words. Dad, trust me, please. I stayed. Dinner went on around me like nothing had happened, because to everyone else, nothing had. I sat with a couple of Marcus's engineering friends who'd flown in for the wedding, decent people who asked me real questions about the shop and actually listened to the answers. But every few minutes my eyes would drift to the head table, where Chelsea sat glowing next to my son, laughing at something her father said, and Gordon would occasionally catch my eye across the room and hold it a beat too long, the way a man looks at something he's already decided isn't worth his attention twice. After the dinner wound down, Marcus asked me to walk out to the parking lot with him. We sat in my truck, the old F-150 I've had since Marcus was in middle school, and for a minute he just stared at the dashboard, working up to something. Dad, he said, I need you to listen to something, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything. He pulled out his phone. Voice memos, 9 of them, each one labeled with a date going back 4 months. He hit play on the first one, and Chelsea's voice came through, clear, easy, nothing at all like the warm woman who'd complimented my pot roast. 3 more weeks, Mom, and I'm officially a boon. Then the trust distribution process starts. Then Deborah's voice bored businesslike. And the father-in-law? Does he sign anything? Chelsea, almost laughing. Daddy's already got the paperwork ready. Once Marcus and I are married, he becomes eligible for a joint filing on Grandpa Whitfield's old land parcels through the marriage, and Marcus will sign anything I put in front of him. He trusts me completely. I sat there in the dark cab of my own truck and felt something inside my chest go very still and very cold. Here's what I didn't know, what none of us outside that family knew. My father-in-law, Carol's father, had left our family a piece of undeveloped land near the Delaware route, 1 corridor decades ago, 41 acres that had sat mostly forgotten, taxed and paid and otherwise ignored, because nobody thought it was worth anything beyond the small rental income from a farmer who leased part of it for soybeans. Carol had put it in a trust years back with Marcus as the eventual beneficiary once he turned 30, 1 year away. What none of us knew, and what Gordon Whitfield apparently knew months before any of us, was that the state had quietly approved a new commercial corridor extension connecting to that stretch of Route 1, the kind of infrastructure project that turns worthless farmland into gold overnight. Gordon's holding company had development contacts. He'd done the math. He'd calculated, with the same cold precision he probably used to calculate everything, that if his daughter married into that trust, and if the paperwork transferring trustee control could get signed during the wedding chaos while everyone's guard was down, his company would be first in line to option that land before the public announcement drove the price into the stratosphere. There were more recordings. There was a text exchange Marcus had screenshotted where Gordon instructed Chelsea, in writing, to make sure Marcus signed a specific document before the honeymoon while he's still riding the high. There was a draft trustee transfer form with Marcus's name pre-filled, waiting only for a signature that Gordon's lawyer had already prepared. Time to be presented during the wedding weekend, when Marcus would be least likely to read the fine print. Son, I finally managed to say, what do you want to do? Part of me, the part my own father raised, wanted to just cancel things quietly. Handle it man to man, no scene, no spectacle. Keep it between people, the way my dad always said. But then I thought about Chelsea's voice on that recording, easy and amused, talking about my dead wife's father's land like a line item. I thought about Gordon's handshake, quick and dismissive, already filing me away as irrelevant. I thought about Carol and what she would have said, because I could hear her plain as day. Walt, you let the truth stand up when it's ready to stand up. Don't you dare sit on it. I'm with you, I told Marcus. Whatever you're planning, I'm with you all the way. The next afternoon, Marcus introduced me to his college roommate, Tariq, who ran audio-visual production for corporate events on the side and had, it turned out, already agreed to help 2 days earlier when Marcus first found the recordings. They'd arranged with the venue's event coordinator to set up a surprise anniversary tribute screen, paid extra to guarantee no questions asked, and tested the whole system the morning of the wedding while the Whitfields were occupied with hair and makeup appointments. I went back to my hotel room that night and sat on the edge of the bed in my undershirt for a long while, looking at my hands, thinking about my father teaching me to rebuild my first carburetor at this same age Marcus is now, thinking about 3 generations of Boone men who never had much but always had their name meaning something. Something settled in me that night. Not rage exactly. Something quieter and harder than rage. Resolve, maybe. Carol would have called it clarity. The wedding was set for 1 o'clock the next afternoon at the same country club, out on the lawn overlooking the 18th green, with the reception to follow inside. I got there early and watched the chairs fill up, white folding chairs in rows facing an arch, dripping with white roses that probably cost more than I make in a month. The Whitfield side filled in first, loud and confident, Gordon working the crowd like he was running for office, Deborah air-kissing her way down the aisle. Marcus stood up front in his tuxedo, and to anyone else in that crowd he looked like any nervous groom. I knew my son. I'd watched him grow up. I could read the set of his jaw from 50 feet away, and it wasn't nerves. It was resolve. The music started. Chelsea came down the aisle on her father's arm, in a dress that must have cost more than my truck, radiant, performing joy for an audience of 200, and Gordon handed her off to Marcus with a look on his face like a man closing a deal he'd been working for a year and a half. He took his seat beside Deborah. Deborah glanced over at me once, and I held her stare and didn't blink, and something flickered across her face, the first crack of doubt I'd seen from any of them. The officiant, a friendly older man in a gray suit, began the ceremony. Welcomes, a reading from Chelsea's cousin, the standard rhythm of these things. Then he turned to Marcus for the vows. Marcus, do you take Chelsea to be your lawfully wedded wife? Marcus raised his hand slightly. Before I answer that, he said, and his voice carried clean across that lawn without him needing to raise it, there's something everyone here deserves to see first. The officiant blinked, confused. Chelsea's smile went rigid, and behind the arch, the screen Tariq had rigged came to life. I want to slow down here, because it didn't happen all at once. There was a moment of pure confusion first, 200 heads turning toward the screen, murmuring, unsure what they were looking at. Then recognition, as Chelsea's own recorded voice filled the lawn through the sound system. 3 more weeks, Mom, and I'm officially a Boone. Daddy's already got the paperwork ready. Then Deborah's voice, unmistakable, asking whether the father-in-law needed to sign anything. Then silence, the kind where 200 people arrive at the same understanding in the same instant. I watched faces instead of the screen. I already knew what was playing. I watched a woman in a wide-brimmed hat press a hand to her mouth. I watched one of Chelsea's bridesmaids go pale and take a half-step backward off the aisle runner. I watched Deborah Whitfield's face drain of color so completely she looked like she'd been carved from the same white stone as the club's columns. Gordon shot to his feet. Turn that off. That's doctored. That's completely fabricated. The recording kept playing. The second clip was Gordon himself, in what looked like his home office, voice flat and businesslike. The corridor gets approved next quarter. That land's worth 8 times what it's assessed at right now. We need the trustee transfer signed before the public notice goes out, understood? While he's still riding the wedding high. A sound moved through the crowd, low and rolling, somewhere between a gasp and a groan. Several guests on the Whitfield side stood up. 2 started making their way toward the parking lot. The third clip was shorter, just Chelsea and her mother, sounding like they'd caught it on a phone left recording by accident in a dressing room. I don't know how long I can keep smiling at that mechanic, Chelsea said, and even hearing it a second time, out loud, in front of 200 people, it landed like a slap. After the honeymoon, we'll put some distance between Marcus and his father. Easier that way. Deborah, laughing softly on the recording. Just get through the ceremony, sweetheart. The lawn broke open into noise. I stood completely still. I'd promised Marcus I would, and I held to it, though I couldn't begin to tell you what it cost me to stand there and not move a muscle while my son's bride sobbed into her hands. Those are edited, Chelsea said, turning to Marcus, mascara already running. Marcus, tell them, those are edited, that's not... But Marcus had turned to face the crowd, and his voice was level in a way that was almost frightening to hear from my own boy. Every recording has been authenticated by a forensic audio analyst. The land in question belongs to a trust established by my late mother's father. The transfer document with my forged signature space has already been reviewed by an attorney. This has been in motion for at least 4 months. Gordon started moving toward the sound booth, toward Tariq, but Tariq had already locked the equipment case and stepped between him and the controls. And the presentation kept going. Documents now, filling the screen, a draft transfer form, email correspondence between Gordon and a development firm dated 5 months back, projected land values, Gordon's signature and letterhead on all of it. Then a woman stood up from the third row on the Whitfield side, maybe 55, dressed sharp but without any show about it. My name is Renata Cole, she said, loud enough to carry. I'm an assistant attorney general with the Delaware Department of Justice, Fraud Division. I was invited to this wedding as a family friend of the Whitfields. She looked directly at Gordon. Mr. Whitfield, what's on that screen constitutes evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted forgery of a trust document. I'd strongly advise you not to leave these grounds. Carol would have loved that moment. I know she would have. Gordon blustered, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, a business matter, nothing criminal. Deborah wept behind oversized sunglasses she'd apparently kept in her clutch for exactly this kind of weather. Chelsea tried to move toward the parking lot and was gently but firmly stopped by 2 of Marcus's groomsmen, who simply stood in her path without a word. She sank down right there on the grass in her wedding dress and cried, and I want to tell you I felt nothing but satisfaction, but that wouldn't be the whole truth. Somewhere underneath the vindication there was something sadder too, watching a young woman crumble under the weight of a scheme that had never really been hers to begin with, that she'd been raised into, like a family trade. What I felt most, standing there on that lawn in my pressed navy suit, was the weight lifting. 3 years of missing Carol, 18 months of swallowing something that tasted wrong every single time Deborah opened her mouth, 41 years of building something with my hands that people like the Whitfields would never once respect until they had no other choice. All of it lifting off my shoulders at once. If you've ever walked into a room where you felt like the help instead of a guest, where you did everything right and still got looked through, you know exactly what that release feels like. That moment when the truth finally catches up to what your gut already knew. Police arrived within 20 minutes. Gordon and Deborah were both taken in for questioning that same afternoon. Chelsea, shortly after, once investigators confirmed she'd known about the forged signature space from the beginning. Guests filmed with their phones. Some stood frozen. One of Chelsea's younger cousins came over to Marcus in tears, saying she hadn't known any of it, that she was so sorry. The caterers stood there with trays of untouched appetizers. The band sat with their instruments in their laps, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. Marcus found me in the thinning crowd, and for a while we just stood together without saying anything. Food's already paid for, Dad, he finally said. I looked around. A good chunk of the guests had left, but Marcus's real friends were still there. My sister had driven up from Baltimore the moment she got my text, and a handful of people from Chelsea's side, who'd clearly had their own doubts for a while now, had quietly drifted to our side of the lawn. I'd rather celebrate than grieve, Marcus said. So we did. We turned the band back on. We ate. My sister pulled me onto the little dance floor they'd set up on the grass, and she held my face in her hands the way Carol used to and told me Carol would be so proud of both of us. And I had to look away for a second because that landed somewhere deep I wasn't ready for. In the weeks after, Renata Cole's office built the case with what Marcus had given them. Forensic accountants dug into Gordon's holding company and found what none of us had known, that the Whitfield fortune everyone assumed was rock solid was actually propped up on debt, 3 failed commercial developments in the last 5 years, a second mortgage on the Greenville house that nobody in their social circle knew about. They needed our land because they were drowning quietly, and had been for longer than anyone guessed. That knowledge complicated things for me in a way I hadn't expected. Not sympathy exactly. More An understanding of the difference between cruelty because you enjoy it, and cruelty because you've convinced yourself it's the only way to survive. A man named Harold Ferris reached out to us about 3 weeks after everything fell apart. He'd been engaged to a woman connected to the Whitfield family circle 6 years earlier, before Gordon's financial troubles had gotten quite this desperate, and the pattern had been eerily similar, though it hadn't gone as far as forgery that time. He testified. One more person came forward after that with a similar story about Gordon steering a family member toward a marriage that happened to align suspiciously well with a piece of undervalued property. The Whitfield's lawyer offered a settlement before trial, $275,000, and a written apology, in exchange for Marcus and I agreeing not to press charges further and to keep the whole matter out of any further legal proceedings. Marcus and I sat with that offer for about 15 minutes in my kitchen, at the same table Carol used to do the books on. Then I said no. Not because we're wealthy and didn't need it, because Lord knows a man who runs a 3-bay shop could always use $275,000. I said no, because Harold Ferris deserved to have his story heard in an actual courtroom instead of buried under a settlement check. I said no because whoever Gordon Whitfield would have circled back to after us, and there would have been someone, deserved not to have to go through what we went through. The trial ran 9 days. Gordon's defense tried to paint Marcus as a jilted, paranoid fiancé who'd manufactured evidence out of jealousy over money he'd never earned himself. It was a creative argument. It had nothing to stand on. You cannot explain away a man's own voice on a certified recording talking about a forged trustee's signature. You cannot explain away a draft document with your own letterhead and a blank space pre-filled with someone else's name. You cannot explain away 2 separate people from 2 separate years describing the exact same pattern. Guilty on all counts. Gordon Whitfield got 9 years. Deborah got 4. Chelsea, whose lawyer successfully argued she'd been raised into the scheme rather than architected it, got 18 months and 5 years probation. The judge said something in her closing remarks that I wrote down on an index card and stuck to my refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a wrench, right where I see it every morning making coffee. She said the Whitfield family had built their entire lives on the assumption that other people's dignity had a price tag low enough for them to afford, and that assumption was precisely what put them in her courtroom. Marcus moved back close to home about 8 months later, not running from anything, just choosing something. He still works his engineering contracts, mostly remote now, and he spends his Saturdays out at my shop again, same as when he was 17, elbow deep in some stranger's transmission, and I'll be honest, having him back under that lift with me most weekends has done more for me than any therapist could have. Last spring he started seeing a woman named Priya, a high school science teacher who showed up to their second date in steel-toed boots because Marcus had warned her they might end up at the shop, and who has never once looked at my hands like they needed explaining. Here's what this whole ordeal taught me, and I don't say this lightly, because I had to live through every ugly minute of it to understand it. The people who work hardest to make you feel small are usually the ones most afraid of what you actually represent. Deborah Whitfield didn't call me a mechanic because she thought it was an accurate description of who I was. She called me that because she needed me to be small, needed the whole room to see me as small, so that what her family was doing to my son could still feel, in her head, like just business, like nothing personal, like nothing wrong. The mistake people make when someone tries to humiliate them like that is turning it inward, asking themselves what they could have done to earn more respect. There was nothing to fix. There never is. The problem was never yours to begin with. What Marcus understood, standing at that altar with a voice steadier than mine has ever been under pressure, is that the truth doesn't wait for the right moment to be convenient. It doesn't need permission. It just needs one person brave enough to stand still and let it speak. So let me ask you something, and I mean this as a real question, not a rhetorical one. Is there a room in your life right now where you've been making yourself smaller so somebody else could feel more comfortable? And if the answer is yes, how much longer are you planning on doing that? I'm 67 years old. I've got grease under my fingernails that's older than some of you watching this, a son who still comes by the shop most Saturdays, and a picture of Carol on my nightstand that I talk to more than I probably should admit. I sleep fine most nights now. That's not nothing. That took a while to earn back. Before you go, do something for me. Drop a comment and let me know, friend to friend. Type a 1 if you think Marcus was right to expose the Whitfields in front of everybody at that ceremony instead of handling it quietly. Type a 2 if you'd have taken that settlement money, because $275,000 is real money and nobody should feel ashamed for considering it. And type a 3 if you'd have walked straight back out those country club doors the second you heard that comment and never looked back. I read every single one of these, so tell me where you're watching from, and while you're at it, tell me what time it is where you are right now. Somebody's watching this at 3 in the morning from somewhere I'll never see with my own eyes, and somehow tonight, this is the story they needed. That means something to me every time I think about it. If this one found you tonight, if any part of it landed somewhere true, stick around. I've got more stories like this one, and I'll keep sharing them as long as folks keep showing up to listen. Hit that subscribe button if you'd like to be here for the next one, friend.